Well, Jay, thank you so much for being here.
Of course.
I really appreciate
You
it.
bet.
I've always been a big fan.
Thank
I
you.
already ordered and read your latest book.
Thank you.
because
Didn't
it's
take long.
incredible. No, it did not. So tell me a little bit about that. Why are we focusing on the importance of speed?
Coming out of the pandemic, I had this observation that people changed the way they thought about time, and that they care more about their time, because I sort of stitched together all these trends, like people not wanting to commute, and people bringing their kids on vacation or to conferences. It's like all these different trends to me sort of spelled, well, we think about time differently. But of course, before I do any projects or keynotes, I always validate it with research, which I'm sure you all appreciate. So I spent a bunch of money and did a very comprehensive research study to see, well, is this actually true? And it is true that we care about time more than ever. 2/3 of customers say that speed is now as important as price. And knowing that, there's a lot of ramifications for business, right? That we just have to embrace a culture of responsiveness in our organizations that perhaps we haven't fully embraced in the past.
I think that is a fascinating, incredibly true. But I also think there must be something to the fact that maybe during the pandemic, our priorities were reshuffled.
Oh, absolutely.
And that had to have impacted
Yeah.
this importance of time. And it also feels like now there's so much choice that we can get stuck in that inability to choose because we're overwhelmed by
Absolutely.
choice.
Paradox of choice is a real thing.
Yeah.
Great book, by the way.
Well, thanks.
Yeah.
Big reader, so I'll put that one on the top of my
Yeah,
list
it's a good
as
one.
well. But so how did you get so interested, not just in the concept of time, but how to apply it to, we're talking about the apartment industry, but it seems like you found an application for this importance across industries.
Yeah, I always feel like if I can discover a business advantage, right, something that you can, a dial that you can turn or a switch that you can flick to outperform competitors for a period of time, great. And I think I'm pretty good at finding those trends, but a trend is useless without application, right? A trend is just a slogan without a way to execute it. So spent a lot of time and did a lot of research and worked with a lot of companies to say, all right, if we're going to build this culture of responsiveness inside our organization, what does that look like procedurally and operationally? Like, what do we do with our actual frontline people in an organization who are maybe working with residents, prospective residents, et cetera? What do we tell them to do different in a world where we embrace speed versus a world where we don't embrace it fully? And so that's where I put together the framework that is very applicable, I think, to all industries. And then that's contained in the book. And of course, the book is very, very, very small because it's dumb to write a full-length book about speed.
Yeah,
Doesn't make any sense.
I mean, you're on brand. And I have to say,
Exactly.
I feel like you're in my brain because nothing frustrates me more than reading a concept or loving a trend or an idea and thinking, oh, this is the advantage that I'm going to have. And then going, I have no idea how to do this.
Right.
Like someone
Very frustrating.
tell me. It's infuriating. So I always read the book and then go, no, where's the workbook? Right?
Well,
I want
it helps
steps 1 through
that
6.
I was in the consulting business for 3 decades, right? So you can't walk in and do a consulting project and be like, here's a trend and just leave. Like that's not how it works, right? So you actually have to show your work. And so for me, it's just how I do it, right? To then incorporate that on stage or on the page, et cetera.
So what's been the biggest thing that you've seen have an impact from what you're saying? You're telling people be fast, but maybe not too fast because we don't want to be a creep.
Yep.
What have you seen this impact businesses? Have you seen it change?
Yeah, I would say the one that people tend to apply first in their actual business is the one we talked about, reply without answers.
Yeah.
Where when somebody has a question, instead of you not answering until you have the information, you answer and say, I got it. And then you get the information, you come back. Now, does that require you to answer twice? It does, right? But the first one, you're just saying, on it. And the second time, you're saying, here's what you actually need from me. The psychological change to the people who have the question in that interaction is dramatic, powerful, and meaningful from a business standpoint. And it's also a pattern of behavior that's relatively easy to train frontline people to execute. And so across all the principles in the book, that's the one that typically gets addressed first and for good reason.
I can't help but think that's also because one of the things that I believe is fundamental about human nature is people want to be heard.
Yeah.
And so it's that you're acknowledging that they asked you a question.
Absolutely.
I don't know if you have a significant other or a partner or you're married, but I cannot help but think about how many times I've said to my husband, like, do you hear me? Are you listening? You know, and if he had said, I don't have an answer to your question yet, but I hear you and here's what you were asking.
It's in the voicemail box.
Right. A fundamental difference, right?
Absolutely.
So absolutely. I think that's incredible.
And it really does. It's funny you say that, Chelsea, because it really does help in your personal life. So I've been using this technique for a couple of years now, 2-3 years. And it really does matter. I use it with my spouse and with my kids and my friends, and it matters a lot.
Yeah, it's amazing. I also have to say, I love that you bring up that we have somewhat, I don't want to say a false impression, but the wrong idea sometimes of generations.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say one of my personal pet peeves, even in my research, has been that I have to be careful not to believe certain things about Gen Z. I have a 16-year-old daughter, so I get a little testy when I hear people say, kids these days, they're so lazy, or they don't want this, or they don't want that. So I really loved hearing or finding out that actually they're patient and they want more information, but they're maybe more patient than our older generations.
Yeah, they're willing to wait slightly longer. It's not a colossal difference, but it's statistically meaningful. They're willing to wait longer to get what they need from a business, whether that's an email response, a phone call back, an appointment set up, pay a bill, whatever the circumstances are. They're willing to wait longer than any other generation.
Yeah.
Now, it's not days longer, certainly, but it is longer.
Yes.
And I just find that really fascinating. People ask me, in all the research around speed, what's the thing that surprised you the most? And it was that. Yeah. Because we all make those assumptions, right? That Gen Z and even, now the next generation beyond them, grew up with technology and apps and everything instantaneous in a way that other cohorts didn't. And that naturally you would assume that would indicate that they have less patience, that they want everything now. And it's not actually true. So I agree, it's a false narrative. And I think every new generation gets a bad rap. Right? Gen X, oh, they're lazy, right? Yes. Millennials, oh, they're boastful, they want to take over the world, which is probably true. Gen Z, they're also lazy. It's just like it's like when old people are like, I can't stand music these days.
Rock and roll, ruining the
world.
Yes,
Exactly.
Yes. Well, I know that one of the things we found in our research that was really surprising to me about the younger generation was that they were sending more emails. Yeah. So the likelihood of them sending more emails or making more phone calls, them not getting a response was even higher than an older generation.
Absolutely.
And I have a hypothesis I want to run by you and see what you think. I think, now this is not official J. Turner research, but we've been thinking and noodling on this for a long time about why would that be? And I think maybe the kids these days, as we're going to say, are not afraid to ask for help. Yeah. Because I think there's an older generation, even as a elder millennial, that makes me want to die to say that out loud, that we and maybe older generations were raised to find it out yourself, figure it out, right? Yeah. You just figure it out no matter what. And how cool that we have a generation now that's willing to ask. Yeah, I think well, and do not take lack of information as an acceptable scenario. Yeah. Yeah. Right? Like I lived much of my life with a colossal information deficit. Yeah. But that's just how we did it, But my kids who are 25 and 22, if they don't know, they want to know. Yeah. And they'll figure it out or they'll ask or whatever. Now, I think it's interesting that sending so many emails, I have seen people in that cohort not want to make as many phone calls. Right. We're not calling. My daughter, when she moved to Paris, she works for a software company there. She had to get like a physical. Yeah. And so she asked me, I've got to get a physical. How do I do that? And I'm like, well, you call the doctor's office and you set up an appointment. Well, how do I do that? Okay, every business has a 7-digit number. There's something called a phone number. She's like, yeah, I know how a phone works, but I don't know what to say. Yeah. Well, you say, this is Annika, and I need an appointment for a physical. She's like, is that all there is to it? Like, do you think there's a series of physical challenges necessary to you first the razor wire, right? And then, it was like, it just, the idea of a synchronous conversation via telephone is oftentimes paralyzing to younger generations. And I find it really interesting. I think that's interesting too. I also have to say and admit that my personal flaw is I will chop my leg off before I will call someone. Yeah. So,
I feel that. And conversely, my first or second boss when I was a young professional said, remember this, Jay, this is going back. I mean, this is almost 30 or 25 years ago.
yeah.
Like, look, by the time you get the third email, just call, right? It
Absolutely.
is way faster at this
Yeah.
point to just have a synchronous conversation
Yes.
as opposed to just punting this message soccer ball back and forth, for infinity days.
Right.
And it's exactly true.
Yeah.
And I tell my kids that all the time, like, just call.
Yes.
Just call.
Yeah.
Just call. And they're like, no. They'll go through any amount of punishment to avoid the telephone.
No, I'll call for a conversation or to solve a problem.
Sure,
Because
yeah.
it's easier.
Yeah.
But to set an appointment, and this goes to our industry
Oh.
too, right? Why are we forcing people to call? To
Everyone
set
go to
an
websites now. They want an
appointment?
app. It's not even a website feels like a lot,
Yeah,
right? They want to be able to do it,
On
in
an
a-
app.
yeah,
or quick.
a dedicated app.
Yes,
Yeah,
the
it's crazy.
pain for me of trying to explain my schedule to someone who's then
Mm-hmm.
referencing their schedule is just
Right, exactly.
torturous.
Or text, right? That was one of the interesting things out of the pandemic too. I've done a lot of work with Podium in that category, and the percentage of consumers who now embrace texting
Mhm.
for business stuff like
Yeah.
appointment setting, et cetera, has gone up dramatically
Yeah.
post-pandemic. And that wasn't true in the US. It was always true in other parts of the world.
Right.
Asia, to a lesser degree, Europe, like texting for business was totally cool.
Mhm.
It always felt like kind of an invasion, like
Mhm.
texting is for personal,
Yeah.
not for business. But after the pandemic or during the pandemic, everybody kind of let that objection fall. And
Yeah.
now I think it's actually a really good technique to embrace texting for all the things you might use email or phone calls for.
Yeah. Well, I think it must be interesting. It could be a part of the fact that nobody has a business phone anymore.
Right.
Like when was the
Or a
last
home
time
phone.
you saw somebody have
Yeah.
a business extension? That just doesn't
Yeah,
happen.
it's funny you say that. Every time I'm driving around somewhere and I see a billboard with a phone number on it, I'm like,
What is this?
like number one, I'm not writing it down while I'm
Right.
driving, and number two, like there's no way I'm calling. Right? It's like your phone
yeah.
number but no website address. I'm like,
Wild.
this is not new creative. This has definitely been up here a while.
I love it. So while you've been teaching people about time and the importance of time,
Yeah.
I know you were able to really clearly articulate some pitfalls
Mhm.
of that, if that's your only concern. Like there's
Yeah.
some other things we need to have in
course.
consideration. What's the number one thing we should also consider? Not
Well-
just speed, but
Empathy.
yeah.
This is the challenge. And if I had another hour of time, I would have talked about it. Rapidity is often the enemy of empathy.
Yeah.
And as we apply more AI solutions to our communication, as we use more chatbots to scrape the cream off the top so that humans can handle the more complex cases,
Yeah.
as we use more apps and other technologies to organize our time without having to have a face-to-face interaction or a telephonic interaction, all of that is going to happen. That genie has fully left the bottle.
Right.
But it's also very easy to see, and it happens constantly, that pursuit of efficiency often comes at the cost of basic human understanding.
Mhm.
And in an industry like this, which has high stakes,
Yeah.
right, for everybody involved, you're not selling licorice here. It's kind of a big deal. Empathy cannot be the baby thrown out with the bathwater.
Mhm.
And I know that's a really hard needle to thread, but it's really important to thread it.
It's interesting that you say that because one of the things we have talked about at Jay Turner and with our research, and one of the things that drives us has been treat people well.
Yeah.
I mean, it's such a basic concept to treat humans as humans.
Yeah.
Right? But we just cannot seem as an industry to figure it out. And,
Yeah.
and it's always the crux of the issue, right? At the end of the day, people want to be responded to. Of course they do, right? But people want to be understood. People want to be heard. And it's wild as somebody who's been in this industry for, I'm very embarrassed to say 20 plus years, that
She started when she was 5.
I wish we're still talking about that same thing.
Oh, and it will never go away.
It's never going to go away.
Because we're never going to solve it now because of
Yeah.
technology. It's
Yeah.
not solvable. But I will say it is a real competitive opportunity.
Absolutely.
I've been doing this quite a bit longer than you even. And I'm a 7th generation entrepreneur.
Mhm.
My son's an 8th generation entrepreneur. The number of conversations I had in my life with my dad and my grandfather about empathy and treating customers well,
Mhm.
0 conversations ever. Zero.
Zero.
Because it was never a conversation that needed to be had.
You just did it.
I am from a generation where, of course, you treat customers like your friends. Of course,
Right.
you treat customers with kindness. If you're a good business, you treat your customers better than your family because they're your customers. Like, it was not a conversation that needed to have. Like,
Yeah.
nobody wrote books or gave speeches about empathy in business.
Right.
Ever.
Yeah.
It was like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
But somewhere along the way, we kind of lost our way.
Mhm.
And now we're in an era of empathy deficit.
Yeah.
And that makes me kind of sad, actually. But it is a huge business opportunity because customers expect to be treated poorly now.
Yeah.
There's real data on that.
Yeah.
They expect to be treated poorly. So if you just treat them with a modicum of kindness and sympathy and empathy and respect and humanity, they're like, wow, these
Blown
guys
away.
are amazing, right? It's like, well, it's just the basics, really.
Yeah.
You know, and look, this is a dramatic oversimplification of what is a complex problem, but the golden rule is still a great way to make money in business, right?
Yeah.
Just treat people the way you would like to be treated.
Yeah.
And that seems so pointlessly, just basic and trite, but it's not basic nor trite because it rarely happens.
Yeah. I think it's because of, as our world has expanded, you now have that anonymity, which
Yeah.
I can never say,
Yep.
right? So you're talking to someone, or your customer might be someone that you're never going to see again, never going to meet again, which is wild to think about in housing,
Yeah.
right? We have to remember this is somebody's child,
Yeah.
parent, friend, whatever. I often tell my daughters, not the golden rule, but not to be a one-upper, but the platinum rule. So we don't treat people the way we want to be
Yeah.
treated because we're centering ourselves.
Yeah.
We treat people the way they want to be
Yeah, love that.
treated, right?
Yeah.
Because it's not about us. It should be about them. And I would hope that someday our industry would think about that really well and really apply that because it make all the difference.
I love what you say, though, about lack of proximity.
Yeah.
And that contributes to just sort of a lack of empathy. I think is really true. I mean, I don't know, this isn't my field of study necessarily, although it's something I've been thinking about for my next book, but I think this all started with the internet, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think that was sort of the ignition switch. Like, it's not Sheila who is the elementary school teacher in my town.
Right.
It's SheilaF@gmail.com, right? It just doesn't have the same kind of personal resonance,
Mhm.
which I think is kind of troubling. But I hearken back to my very first job. I was an intern here in Phoenix for a PR firm called Nelson, Ralston, Robb. And this would have been, close your ears. This would have been 1989.
Okay.
And my boss, who ran the firm, told me something. It was like the first week I ever had a real job.
Yeah.
And I never forgot it. And I still think it's incredible advice. He said, Jay, we don't learn anything of value inside this office. We are communications consultants.
Mhm.
The only way we can do that job well is to either be with our clients or be with the customers of our clients.
Yeah.
So whereas many, many professional services firms want their human capital to be at their desk working, right? So they can make sure they're working and producing. His advice was, I don't really want to see you here, right? I want you to be out there.
Yeah.
Because when you're observing people and see how they behave and how they actually feel, only then can you truly execute great communications that matter.
Yeah.
And I think back now, it's been so long, I'm like, wow, what an incredible perspective that it just really had a big impact on me.
Yeah, well, of course it would, because you're trying to make decisions for people based off of what you think they might want.
Yeah.
And at J. Turner, one of the things we try to really do is be the eyes and ears of the industry, right? And
You're
so,
anthropologist, which is what's so cool about it.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so passionate about what we do, and I love finding out. I always say, but why? Has anybody asked them?
Yeah.
We are making all of these decisions for prospective renters or for renters or for whomever it is. And so often I'll say, great, when was the last time you talked to a renter? And someone just looks at me like I'm crazy, you know? And I'm like, let's ask.
Yeah.
Literally, let's just ask.
Yeah.
And they're going to tell you. People will let you know what their expectations are. And then you just do a little bit better.
Yeah, just
right?
a little bit on that.
just a little
bit better. Yeah, I mean, like big data. We talk about big data all the time. Big data.
Yeah.
Big data is the most overrated thing in the history of business.
Right.
Because data in and of itself has no net present value.
Yep.
It's just numbers.
Yeah.
Big data is only useful if it yields big understanding. big data, what am I going to do with these numbers?
Right.
I know numbers I didn't know before. Who cares? You've got to be able to apply that to the human condition, which is why I think the role that you play into sort of being the ligament in the knee between data and human understanding and being able to apply J-Turner research in the real world is so crucial. And a lot of firms, frankly, don't do it. They're like, here's your report.
Right.
Go get them, Tiger.
Yeah, I joke that I say I'm the reality interpreter.
Yeah,
I just
exactly.
take this information and say, here's what this means to you.
Yeah, just somebody standing in front of you in an office.
Yeah. Well, Jay, I could talk to you all day long because I feel like we're on the same wavelength in our brains. And I just love this conversation. And the value that you bring is truly incredible. And the way that you give step-by-step instructions of what to do to improve your business is truly incredible.
Thank you. That's very kind of you to say. I appreciate it.
And you're pretty darn entertaining.
I did the best I can.
Before 10 a.m., I laughed a ton, and it was great.
Thank you. Glad to hear it.
So thank you for being here with us.
My pleasure. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.